Christopher C. Horner is our guest for the rest of the hour. He serves as a senior fellow at CEI, Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's an attorney in Washington, D.C. Horner has represented CEI as well as scientists and members of the U.S. House and Senate on matters of environmental policy in the federal courts, including the Supreme Court. He has written on numerous topics and publications, ranging from law reviews to legal and industrial trade journals to print and online opinion pages, and is the author of the two best-selling books, Red Hot Lies, How Global Warming Alarmists Use Threats, Fraud, and Deception to Keep You Misinformed. Greenpeace has repeatedly targeted Mr. Horner by stealing his garbage on a weekly basis, issuing press releases announcing with whom he dines, and including him in various other hysterical publications. Of course, they're funded by big central banks. They have a fleet bigger than major governments' fleets. They want your property. They want to guilt you into handing everything over to the elite. His new book is Power Grab, How Obama's Green Policies Will Steal Your Freedom and Bankrupt America. Again, new book, Power Grab, How Obama's Green Policies Will Steal Your Freedom and Bankrupt America. And folks, my issue here is rhetoric cannot describe how bad they are. I mean, you watch Audi commercials like Green Police. That's actually what they're doing in Europe and what they have planned here. This has nothing to do with the environment. It's a bunch of control freaks running your life, controlling every facet of it. They know global warming's a fraud. They've already moved on to other scaremongering, and they're not going to stop. And they've said, even if the Senate won't pass this legislation, they don't care. They're going to have the executive branch implement it. So if they are successful, it's over. And look at how they cowed and beat Republicans into submission, because this is what the establishment wants. Look at how BP's been one of their biggest funders of global carbon taxes, a new derivative scam. So Christopher C. Horner, author of Power Grab, that just came out, CEI.org is the website. It's good to have you here with us, sir.
Thank you, Alex.
So much is going on. Let's get into, since we had you on 2 or 3 months ago, what's happened with the power grab, the fake environmental movement, and what new heads the Hydra has sprout, and where all this is going.
Okay, so about 11 months ago, the House passed this cap-and-trade bill. It was about 1,300 pages long, and they obviously did not read the bill. They snuck in 300 more pages of buying votes at 3 a.m. the night of the morning of the vote, and folks declared it dead in the Senate. And then something strange happened. People did get upset, and they had recently been talking about drill here, drill now, and we're sitting on the world's largest energy reserves, and the real national security issue is refusing to tap your domestic energy resources. We won't pass an energy rationing scheme, right? Well, about 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, openly said to Washington papers Politico and I think The Hill that he was going to suspend the committee process in the Senate in order to cram cap and trade down, but they decided they wouldn't call it cap and trade. Reid said, several people said things that are very important. There are 4 people, Harry Reid, John Kerry, Joe Lieberman, and Lindsey Graham. Harry Reid said, well, this would entail the jurisdiction of almost every Senate committee. Now, pause and stop. Why? Because it impacts almost every aspect of your life, including the Senate Finance Committee, which writes tax law. It's the biggest tax increase in our history, and so on. Reid said, therefore, obviously the poor dears would just get confused, he's going to write the bill. And he began bringing in constituencies, and that means not your listeners, by the way. It means even the Chamber and API and green pressure groups. And he asked them, what do you need in order to support this bill? And he asked the Chamber of Commerce and the American Petroleum Institute, what do you need to not run those television ads? Because both groups raised a lot of money to run ads educating voters on this energy tax unless it gave them what they want. And so far, it appears they probably got what they want, which is essentially a gas tax on top of the light switch tax to give to funnel money to projects.
And now they're claiming, I've heard them on the news, oh, there's a new bill in the Senate to fund the cleanup in the Gulf. How convenient that this BP spill happened when they're one of the biggest pushers of the carbon tax. And how convenient they wouldn't put the booms in early in Louisiana and Mississippi and Florida and are letting the oil come in. Oh, I'm afraid they have to have their taxes now.
let me tell you something. I was in the room with BP. I sat in for a gentleman named Ken Lay 13 years ago this month. I was, as I've discussed with you very briefly, I was the Director of Federal Government Relations for a company called Enron. And my number one priority, I was told after I took the job, was to get a global warming treaty and a domestic cap-and-trade scheme. And the company they developed it with was BP, and they had set up this market with Goldman Sachs. All of this does fit very conveniently. Look, I understand how it fits into the narrative today, but you have to understand, I was the crazy guy on the street corner muttering about this for about 6 years before anybody, oh, wait a second, I got it. It's called rent-seeking. These businesses trying to make money the old-fashioned way by having their buddies in government agree to take some of their power in return for guaranteed opposition to competition and a wealth transfer from you and me to them. So they bought all these uneconomic industries, like Enron had the world's largest windmill company they bought on the cheap. It's now called GE Wind.
Well, I mean, here's an example. BP will pay $1 billion fine. They've already made that in increased oil prices. And then now they'll get more liability protection from government. Their competition won't be able to drill in the Gulf. It's just like FEMA got more power by screwing up what happened in Katrina.
Well, I'll tell you this. It's pretty clear that, well, it's in the public record, that the green groups actually, with whom I met, by the way, that same day, in the same room, there were groups like Union of Concerned Scientists and Natural Resources Defense Council. They were Baptist and bootlegger coalitions. The green groups, after the BP, after the well exploded, the green groups were shrieking to the White House, "Don't you dare burn that oil off." And they screamed about consequences of igniting the oil before it got too well mixed. Well, as I said, actually, on a TV show, I think that night, or within a few days, you have to understand something. I could be as irresponsible as a lot of people were about Bush and just say, look, the administration, which, by the way, was BP's favorite political candidate over 20 years, as you know, the administration was taking orders from its green group buddies, and they want this to be as bad as it can possibly be, because the damage, while real, is temporary. The tragedy was the 11 men who lost their lives. But this is a White House that says never let a good crisis go to waste. They even engineer crises like claiming a global catastrophe from global warming. And the Greens, of course, have never made money hand over fist like they have.
And for those that don't know, if they would have ignited this within hours, there would be almost zero problem. Almost all of it would have burned off at the source. Carbon dioxide would have been put into the atmosphere, much smaller than a volcano, would have literally had almost no effect if they would have done what the old-timers did and set that sucker on fire until they figured out a plan to cap it. And now we know why 35 days later, the White House has done everything they can to block this, because now they're going to get their carbon taxes that Paul Volcker demands we must have to pay Goldman Sachs their bonuses. Now they're going to get it.
Let me tell you, okay, so we know what BP actually did engineer this, and the Greens are biting them, as you knew they would. BP and Enron were in on this from the beginning. Again, I was in the room. There's no point denying it. The Greens did tell the White House, don't burn it off. We just know the White House said, don't burn it off. It probably is a coincidence, and they weren't taking their marching orders from the Greens. But we know BP's been pushing an agenda that John Kerry said, even after the spill. Ironically, he said, I've been working with these companies, BP and Shell, to write this law. He said this. It's, again, in the public domain. So Harry Reid said, I'm going to suspend the committee process, like with health care. John Kerry said, I'm not going to call this bill cap and trade because I don't know what cap and trade means. Yes, he does. And it has cap and trade in it. He just said it's mean if you call it that because, of course, there's a memo I talk about in Power Grab written by Stanley Greenberg, who was Bill Clinton's pollster. He conducted some polling, and he said to his clients, who are Democratic politicians, you have to do two things. Stop saying cap and trade and global warming and start calling it something else, and then it might work. Don't change your agenda. Just call the agenda something else.
Yeah, he called it our deteriorating atmosphere.
Well, he said, here are the catchphrases that I've polled well. Green jobs and clean energy. So John Kerry said, I don't want to call it cap and trade. I don't know what cap and trade means. It's a jobs and national security bill, clean energy. Of course it is, dear. Joe Lieberman said, I don't want to call it cap and trade because you remember the artist formerly known as Prince? Well, this is now called pollution emission. He said that. This is now called the pollution emission reduction credits or something. He won't say cap and trade. Lindsey Graham said 2 weeks ago, this isn't a global warming bill because global warming no longer exists as a reason to pass legislation. It's still the same bill. He still said he'd vote for it. He just took his name. He said, I won't be a sponsor because I'll get in all sorts of trouble with my constituents, but I'll still support it. But it's no longer the reason that it's always been. The point of all this is where I begin with the book. Nobody says cap and trade would detectably impact the climate. I repeat, nobody says the temperature after cap and trade would be any different than it otherwise was going to be. It's not about the temperature. It was offered in the name of the temperature. Their pollster told them to cut it out.
Of course, it's about deciding who can have industry, who can have businesses, and taxing the hell out of us.